Today we're discussing the maxillary artery, which is a terminal branch of the external carotid artery, which we can see here coursing up the side of the neck, giving off the superficial temporal artery, and then the maxillary artery here, which arises posterior to the neck of the mandible, coursing anteriorly deep to the neck of the mandibular condyle, and it supplies the deep structures of the face. The artery can be broken up into three different parts: retromandibular, pterygoid, and pterygopalatine, with the lateral pterygoid muscle being in the middle. In the retromandibular portion, there are 5 main branches we need to know. The first one being the deep auricular artery. It's tiny and it supplies the external acoustic meatus. The next one being the anterior tympanic artery. It's also tiny and supplies the tympanic membrane. The first big one is called the middle meningeal artery. It supplies the dura and the calvaria. It pierces through the foramen spinosum. Next to it is the accessory meningeal artery, and it supplies the cranial cavity. It pierces through foramen ovale. Coming off the bottom is the inferior alveolar, which gives off this small branch to the mylohyoid, which supplies the mylohyoid and the anterior belly of the digastric muscles. Then it pierces through the mandibular foramen, through the mandibular canal, giving off dental branches, and finally going through the mental foramen to become the mental branch. In the pterygoid part are 5 branches, each supplying muscles. Up top we have the deep temporal arteries, anterior and posterior, which ascend to supply the temporalis muscle. Then we have the pterygoid branch, which supplies the lateral and medial pterygoid muscles. Then we have the masseteric branch, which goes through the mandibular notch, supplying the masseter muscle. And lastly is the buccal branch, supplying the buccinator muscle. The pterygopalatine part is in the pterygopalatine fossa. In the skull, you can see it here. It's a bilateral cone-shaped depression extending deep from the infratemporal fossa all the way to the nasal cavity via the sphenopalatine foramen. In the cadaver, you can see it here. We have the posterior superior alveolar supplying the teeth and the maxillary sinus, the infraorbitals going out the infraorbital foramen, the sphenopalatine going out the sphenopalatine foramen to supply the nasal cavity, the artery of the pterygoid canal, supplying the superior part of the pharynx, the pharyngotympanic tube, and the tympanic cavity. The pharyngeal supplies the roof of the pharynx and the sphenoidal sinus, and the descending palatine going through the palatine canal to supply the palate.